He leaves the lights off because darkness feels like a witness that cannot be subpoenaed. The house sits at the edge of an American nowhere, where cul-de-sacs bend into retention ponds and porch flags fade against the long sun. He moves with the calm precision of someone who has practiced disaster in his head 1,000 times, a man who knows which floorboards complain and which hinges will hold their breath. His name is Elias Mercer, and he treats his thoughts like tools kept in labeled drawers. He believes in lists. He believes in timing. He believes in clean exits. The room carries the stale smell of a life that pretended it was under control, a treadmill that doubles as a coat rack, a granite island with a knife block purchased on discount at a warehouse store that sells optimism by the pallet. The victim had been careful in the ways people are careful when they expect to be watched. Cameras pointed toward the driveway, a motion sensor near the back door, a fake sign warning about a security system that never existed. The sign worked on most people. Elias is not most people. He studies the surfaces the way an accountant studies subtraction. Wipe, fold, pocket. The stainless steel sink shines with the kind of innocence that only comes after effort. He memorizes the last arrangement of the room as if the furniture were alibis rehearsing their lines. The walls are painted a color with a name that promises calm. The air says nothing at all. The body lies in the center of it. He does not think of it as a person because names lift weight and he is here to travel light. The victim had a name that fit well in articles and company newsletters. The victim had a face that could sit quietly on a LinkedIn page and never worry about lighting. The victim was the kind of American whose refrigerator had a magnet from a marathon that ended with craft beer in a branded tent. Elias knows these details because he treats people like systems. The more he knows, the fewer surprises survive. He watches the second hand of the kitchen clock stutter forward like a nervous confession. There's a schedule for everything. 10 minutes to confirm stillness. 3 minutes to make a phone screen go dark with a gloved thumb. 20 seconds to check for neighbors returning late with grocery bags heavy with the wrong things. 5 minutes to trace a quiet exit through a yard where dogs are all bark until they remember they are loved. He files each minute behind his ribs. He does not admire his work. Admiration creates corners where mistakes hide. He simply confirms the task meets the threshold he demands from himself. He believes that a decision is either complete or it is a hazard, and he does not leave hazards behind. Outside, the subdivision breathes like a patient on a machine. Timers wake lamps in living rooms where football games talk to empty couches. Garage doors surrender to remote controls like arguments that have already lost. The road feeds into an interstate that eventually becomes every interstate, a ribbon of exits promising gas, food, and regret. Elias knows this geography because it was designed for men like him to vanish inside it. He pulls the front door until it clicks, not loud enough to echo, just real enough to close a chapter. In the car, he does not turn on the radio. He prefers the companionship of silence that does not ask questions. He drives with steady hands, a man in the right lane who signals early and obeys every sign because defiance invites attention. The night is a field of taillights marching toward the idea of a morning where everything will pretend to be normal again. He thinks about the victim for exactly the distance between two exits and then sets the thought down like a hot pan. He does not carry heat. He follows his post-operation ritual because ritual is what keeps chaos from growing teeth. He parks 2 miles from his motel at an all-night laundromat that smells like detergent and small talk. He feeds the machine with a routine that looks like laundry and is actually absolution. He watches cotton turn circles behind the thick glass and catalogs the other customers because cataloging is the nearest thing he has to comfort. A man in a work vest stares into a phone like it owes him a debt. A woman with a wedding ring cleans a stain on a child's shirt that no longer needs a name. They are witnesses to a life he never applied for. Back at the motel, he chooses a room that faces a stairwell. He prefers exits he does not have to invent. The carpet prints a pattern that looks like it regrets itself. The air conditioner gives the room a personality that thinks in cycles. He places his phone on the desk, plugs it in with a cable that never leaves DNA behind, and opens a notebook he bought with cash. He writes only verbs: arrived, cleared, exited. He signs nothing. He trusts no paper that tries to act permanent. This is not his first operation. It is not his favorite. Favorites are for people who expect celebration. Elias expects aftermath. He reviews the victim's life the way someone reviews a contract they never intended to break, but always suspected they would. There was a consultancy with a name that sounded like a bottled water brand. There were posts about leadership that mistook confidence for character. There was a mortgage that was either a decision or a denial of one. The victim believed in shared calendars and quarterly goals. The victim believed that if the dishes were washed before bed, every problem would be smaller in the morning. The victim believed in rules until a rule got in the way. The client believed the victim had crossed a line. Elias does not draw lines. He accepts them when they arrive with a down payment. He keeps his work simple: tasks, timelines, targets. He declines to climb the moral staircase because the view at the top never matches the brochures. He completes jobs in a country that likes its stories with villains who hold mirrors and heroes who hold receipts. He gives the country what it pays for. Sleep visits like a cautious salesman. He lets it show its samples and take its time. In the morning, he wakes to a light that already looks like late afternoon. He folds the bed into order because messes are invitations. He leaves the key on the counter because metal should not travel with him. The motel manager is a man who smiles, in the way people smile when a day needs to be nudged forward. Elias nods once and becomes a face the manager will never be able to sketch. He drives 3 towns over to purchase a newspaper because he prefers information that stains his fingers. He spreads it on the hood of the car in the far corner of a parking lot behind a discount furniture store. The headline talks about a city council scandal that will end in a speech in a gymnasium that smells like new rubber. He scans local briefs and weather and sports because these sections are where normal hides. The obituary page waits. He expects a notice. He expects the ritual language that transforms a person into an afternoon service with refreshments in a fellowship hall. He expects a photo cropped from a vacation where the victim pretended the ocean was a good listener. The notice is not there. He gives the absence a minute. He does not panic because panic ruins math. He turns the page and reads about a high school robotics team that built a machine to pick strawberries. He folds the paper, drops it in a trash can shaped like a promise, and sits in the car to watch the store's back door swing open for employees who light cigarettes they will regret, and laugh at jokes that will not survive the hour. He waits because waiting is part of the equation, and because information often arrives on its own feet if you make space for it. By noon, the first memorial appears online. A co-worker with a profile photo taken at a conference in Orlando posts a square image of the victim from a holiday party where everyone wore sweaters on purpose. The caption uses the word tragic twice and calls the victim a light. There is a link to a fundraiser that promises to honor a legacy with a scholarship that will, in reality, buy certificates and refreshments. Elias logs the timestamp. He logs the names that appear in the comments because names are the topsoil where the truth grows. He does not click like. He does not click anything. He pulls into a chain coffee shop that arranges pastries like artifacts. He orders a drink he will barely taste and sits where he can see the door and the register and the exit sign that glows a color designed by lawyers. He reviews the victims last week via public breadcrumbs. Gym check-ins. A photo of an airplane wing slicing an afternoon over Dallas. A calendar invite screenshot redacted except for the word strategy, which tells him nothing and everything. He maps the pattern because patterns are how you eavesdrop on fate. The first piece of weird arrives at the speed of a notification. It is a private message from a throwaway account with an image as its name. No greeting, no introduction, only a line that reads like a dare typed in a moving car. The message claims the victim is not a victim. The message claims the house held an audience. The message claims that a camera under the sink saw a performance no obituary could honor. The message arrives with a link. He does not click links from strangers. He saves the text and closes the app because discipline is a fence around disaster. He breathes. He counts to a number he once chose at random and made sacred. He revisits the scene in his head, frame by frame, like an editor who does not trust the director. He recalls the angle of the blinds and the number of steps between the front door and the body's final position. He recalls a bruise that suggested an old fall, a scar disguised as a story that never got told, a faint smell that did not belong to the room and could have belonged to a vanishing act. He asks, the only question that matters to him now, did the task meet the threshold, or did the night betray his math? He returns to the subdivision because sometimes the truth lingers like a shopper who cannot find the right aisle. He parks 3 streets away and walks with a flyer in his hand that advertises a fake roofing service with a real phone number that leads to a void. He becomes one more contractor in a country where contractors multiply after storms. He knocks on a door across from the victim's house and lets the neighbor assume a role. The neighbor becomes a narrator who does not know he is one. The neighbor complains about insurance and a dog that refuses to love the mailman. The neighbor mentions flashing lights 2 nights ago and a woman crying into a phone as if the phone could be a boat. Elias thanks the neighbor without using words. He turns and studies the victim's driveway. There is chalk dust near the curb that speaks of a child who believes asphalt can be a canvas. There is a smudge near the mailbox that looks like a thumbprint made by someone in a hurry. There is a small camera under the eave that faces a direction it did not face before. It is a detail that should belong to nothing and therefore belongs to everything. He does not break in. He does not trespass. He does not repeat the scene because repetition is how you get caught. He watches the rhythm of the street. Delivery vans that carry merchandise and pressure. A jogger who checks a watch again and again as if time would file a different report if asked nicely. A city truck that pauses at a storm drain long enough to suggest curiosity. He waits until a car with a county seal in its window rolls by. The driver does not look at him. The driver looks at the house the way people look at a calendar reminder they forgot to dismiss. He returns to the car and opens the throwaway account he keeps for smoke alarms. He writes a sentence that invites an answer without confessing a question. The account replies with a photo. The photo shows the victim in a hallway that does not belong to the house. The victim walks with a posture that says nothing happened. The victim carries a travel bag that is not in any of the social photographs. The victim passes a vending machine that offers drinks no one has wanted since the last recession. Elias notes the timestamp in the corner of the frame and the way. The camera's clock thinks it lives in a different time zone. He understands now that the obituary page in the newspaper was not an oversight. It was a delay. A delay can be an error, or it can be a plan. He does not believe in errors that arrive with this much choreography. He drives to a storage unit on the edge of town where corrugated doors stand like a chorus of secrets. He opens. The unit he rents under a name that once belonged to a man who loved motorcycles. He inventories his kit the way a stagehand inventories props. There is a box of license plates with histories attached to county clerks who will never return calls. There are 3 phones airtight in static bags. There is a single photo tacked to the plywood. Not sentimental, only a reminder of a rule. The simplest explanation is lazy. He takes one of the phones and a pair of gloves that fit like answers. Night follows him out like an accomplice. He drives to a business park where everything looks closed even when it is open. He parks near a door that says employees only because everyone believes signs. He watches the building that the throwaway account hinted at. The building acts like a clinic that pretends its waiting room is a future you can finance. He watches, long enough to learn the pattern. People enter alone and leave in pairs. People arrive in cars they did not previously own. People vanish into ride shares that take corners too gently. He writes verbs in the notebook. Observed, noted, tracked. He thinks of the body on the floor of the house. He thinks of the stillness. That followed like a conclusion. He thinks of the message that named that stillness a rehearsal. He understands that a performance requires an audience, and an audience requires a camera, and a camera requires someone who will eventually pull the footage into the light. The story believes it is almost ready to introduce itself. He lets the story believe what it needs to. Back at the motel, he sits in the dark and lets the room spin its cycles. He does not turn on the television. He does not fill the silence with entertainment that mistakes noise for proof. He studies the photo again. The victim is alive in a place designed to look temporary. The victim is alive in a corridor that could be anywhere. The victim is alive. And that sentence changes the arithmetic of his life. He closes the notebook on the last verb of the day, adjusted. He wakes before the alarm because alarms are for people who trust sleep more than they should. Morning seeps through motel curtains in a color that refuses to commit to either optimism or regret. Elias Mercer sits on the edge of the bed, a man cataloging the weight of the air as if it might file a report against him. The message about the victim faking death lingers like the aftertaste of cheap whiskey. Present, unwelcome, undeniable. He drives to the diner attached to a gas station because anonymity loves bad coffee. The waitress calls everyone Hon, without caring who they are. Truckers lean over plates of eggs that taste like the griddle's memory. Elias orders toast he will not eat and opens the notebook. He writes the victim's name at the top of a clean page and circles it once. Beneath it, he writes the word alive. He underlines it. He stares at the line until it stops looking like language. He reviews the original contract in his mind. A client who never used the same phone twice. A payment that moved through so many accounts it arrived dizzy. Instructions delivered like scripture. Time, place, target. Nothing about aftermath. Nothing about verification beyond what his own eyes could prove. His eyes had proven plenty. He had watched the victim collapse in the kind of stillness that belongs to endings. He had waited the proper minutes. He had confirmed absence the way a mathematician confirms a sum. He had exited according to the rules. Rules now feel like decor in a house someone already abandoned. He drives to the library because libraries still believe in archives, and archives sometimes forget to guard their truths. Public records show the victim's property taxes paid through the year, mortgage current, no court filings, no bankruptcies, no divorces in progress. The victim lived a life that looked smooth on paper. Smooth lives hide sharp corners. Elias prints nothing. Printing leaves trails. He memorizes dates, addresses, names of companies that owned pieces of the victim's world. A holding company with a name built from random syllables. A consulting firm registered to a mailbox store. A non-profit that filed once and never again. Threads that might weave a story if someone cared enough to pull. He does not yet care. He cares only about the photo from the message, the timestamp, the vending machine, the hallway. Details are coordinates. Coordinates build maps. He visits the building where the photo was taken. Not directly, directness invites notice. He circles twice, a man pretending to be lost in thought or in life. The building rents offices to companies that sell insurance, mortgages, wellness plans nobody keeps. The directory in the lobby lists names that sound invented by committees. Sweet numbers that skip as if certain tenants never existed. Cameras in corners pretend they are asleep. He sits in his car across the street and watches who enters. Men in polos carrying laptops that look leased. women in blazers holding coffee cups like shields, a janitor pushing a cart with one squeaky wheel, nobody who looks like someone who faked death and sent proof to a stranger. By noon, his patience purchases something. A man exits wearing the same jacket the victim wore in a holiday photo 2 years ago. The man walks with the victim's posture, the slight forward lean of someone who distrusts sidewalks. The man carries the same travel bag from the hallway photo. The man looks in no direction long enough to claim it. Elias watches him climb into a car registered to a name the victim once used for deliveries. The car merges into traffic like it has nothing to confess. Elias follows because following is the only honest thing left in his day. He stays 3 vehicles back, the way training taught him before training became experience. The car travels through suburbs where lawns compete for the illusion of wealth, then through stretches of road where billboards promise injury settlements and fast food salvation. Finally, it reaches a warehouse district that smells like metal and ambition. The man parks behind a building with windows too small for curiosity. A sign on the front says it belongs to a shipping company nobody has heard of. Elias remains in his car, engine off, watching the man unlock a side door and vanish. Inside, no hesitation, no looking over shoulders, no awareness that death might be tailing him. Minutes pass. A delivery truck arrives, unloads boxes, departs. 2 employees exit to smoke and complain about supervisors whose names they do not bother to lower their voices for. The man does not reappear. Elias writes in the notebook, "Warehouse, shipping cover, victim alive." He underlines alive twice this time. The client will want to know, eventually. Clients always do, but clients ask dangerous questions when jobs mutate into something unpurchased. Elias does not like dangerous questions. He prefers equations with only one answer. Back at the motel, he reviews everything again. The original job parameters, the message, the photo, the man with the travel bag, the warehouse. Each fact sits on the page like a nail waiting for wood. Something connects them, but connections require patience or recklessness, and he considers patience the cheaper currency. He searches public maps for the warehouse address. The company claims to ship industrial cleaning supplies. Reviews online mention delays, damaged pallets, one missing order nobody bothered to refund. Nothing about fake deaths or men who walk out of morgues into new names. At dusk, he drives past the victim's house again. Police tape flutters across the front door now. A patrol car idles out front, board lights painting the driveway red, blue, red. Neighbors stand in small clusters rehearsing theories they will deliver to news crews if given the chance. Murder brings cameras. Cameras bring performances. Elias knows the cycle because he counts on it. He listens to fragments as he walks by, holding the same fake roofing flyer. Someone claims they heard 2 voices that night. Someone else swears the victim owed money to a cousin in Florida. A teenager insists the house was haunted even before this. The patrol officer tells them all to move along because procedure demands the appearance of control. Elias moves along. He always does. Back at the motel, he opens a new page in the notebook and writes the word motive. He draws a line beneath it that waits for handwriting. None comes. Elias drives away from the warehouse, but not toward home. He doesn't have a home. Homes belong to people with roots, and roots are just invitations for someone to know where to dig. He parks in a 24-hour lot where abandoned cars sleep beneath lamps that blink like exhausted eyes. Engine off, hands still on the wheel, he sits there wondering when the job he accepted, enter, execute, exit, started growing layers like a lie rehearsing ambition. The video keeps looping in his mind. The supposedly dead man, alive and negotiating, smiling the way people smile when they know more than the room around them. Nothing frantic in his movements. No panic in the way he handled the folder with the clinic's logo. It looked like business, like everything had been scheduled down to the last breath he was supposed to take before faking his last one. he opens the notebook and writes, "Did the client know?" Below it, or was the client played too? Because that's the real question now. If the client paid for a real execution, then someone used Elias as stage dressing for a larger trick. A public death with headlines, police tape, witnesses, neighbors giving interviews. Nothing buries the truth better than a lie with documentation. The clinic keeps sitting in the center of the map like a spider in a web of invoices and shell companies. Identity changes, new lives, erased records that takes money, infrastructure, and silence bought wholesale. The next night, Elias returns to the clinic but doesn't go inside. He stays in the car, binoculars in his lap, patience slow as a predator's heartbeat. He wants to see who comes and goes. He wants the faces that don't match the parking lot shadows. For hours, nurses, janitors, patients hiding behind hoods, delivery vans bringing boxes that claim to hold medical supplies, cars leaving with drivers staring straight ahead, the way people do when they carry secrets heavier than passengers. Then, near midnight, 2 black SUVs arrive nose to nose like beasts meeting at a watering hole. 4 men exit. Not police, not doctors. Suits tailored for people who move money instead of lifting it. One carries the same brand of briefcase Elias saw in the video. They don't stay long. 10 minutes inside. When they leave, one of them is carrying nothing. Elias memorizes plates, faces, postures. His brain catalogs details the way other men collect regrets. He drives back to the motel through streets where even the streetlights look like they've given up. On the bed, he spreads, the notebook pages like crime scene photos. The victim alive, the clinic facilitating, the client silent, the warehouse storing more than bleach and mops. He writes, "This isn't identity fraud, this is identity laundering." Morning brings another message from the anonymous account. Not text this time. A document. Scanned pages listing names, dates, new identities assigned like inventory numbers. Some names crossed out in red. The victim's name appears halfway down the page. Date stamped 3 days ago. Crossed out. Elias stares at that red line until it stops meaning what it means. Crossed out could be completion. Crossed out could be cancellation. Either way, it doesn't promise survival. He spends the afternoon watching the warehouse again. The man with the victim's jacket appears briefly, talking to someone Elias hasn't seen before. A woman, sharp movements, hair tied back like she doesn't have time for vanity. She hands him a phone. He makes a call. Minutes later, he drives off fast enough to suggest urgency, but not panic. Elias follows. Industrial streets give way to suburbs, then to a half-finished development of houses with signs promising future luxury living where weeds already own the sidewalks. The car stops at a model home staged with fake furniture and smiling posters of families who don't exist. Inside, through the wide front windows, Elias sees the victim. Alive. Same face, same posture, different clothes. He's pacing, arguing, with the woman. Papers on the fake granite counter between them. At one point, he slams his hand down like punctuation. Elias snaps photos through a telephoto lens. Not because he needs proof for anyone else, because proof keeps him honest with himself. Then the woman answers a ringing phone. She freezes mid-sentence, shows the screen to the victim. Whatever name or number glows there drains the argument, out of both of them. They leave together in the SUV, papers left on the counter like the house itself might sign them. Elias breaks in after they're gone. The papers are contracts between the victim, under a new identity, and something called the Renewal Initiative. Pages of legal fog hiding one clear sentence. All assets transferred upon activation. Signatures missing. Deadlines tomorrow. He pockets nothing. He photographs everything. Back at the motel, he studies the photos under the thin yellow light. A fake death. a clinic manufacturing new lives, a contract moving assets somewhere offshore, and a client who either doesn't know or doesn't care that his money bought theater instead of closure. Elias writes one final line before the page runs out of space. Find out who owns the initiative before the initiative owns me. He starts with the money because money is the only witness that never changes its story. Elias Mercer works through the night with a legal pad, a prepaid laptop, and a rhythm that looks like obsession from far away. He maps transfers like arteries. Retainer to escrow, escrow to intermediaries, intermediaries to a fund with a sunlit name that hides in a country where banks wear gloves. He draws arrows, dates, amounts. The lines meet at something called the Renewal Initiative, a shell built from well-fed shells. The initiative is not a clinic, not a charity, not a hedge fund. Yet somehow it acts like all three depending on which regulator asks and which donor luncheon needs a keynote. He writes the initiative in capital letters because institutions believe in typography. He lists its satellites: the warehouse that ships lies, the clinic that sells rebirth, the model home where fake granite hosts real signatures, a nonprofit that launders grief into grants, an insurance consultancy that knows which policies pay when a person vanishes in public view. He circles the name of the client beside them all. The client is a hinge connecting every door that mattered in this story. The client never once asked for proof beyond a scene that could be filmed through a window. The page fills with nouns. He adds verbs to give them meaning: acquired, laundered, activated, purged. He returns to the model home at dawn when the development still holds its breath. He lets himself in through a back slider that was locked for conscience, not for competence. The papers he photographed remain as he left them, contract language pretending to be oxygen. He reads again. In exchange for a staged death, recognized by a narrow set of partners, the signatory authorizes the initiative to transfer all assets held in a complex nest of trusts to a structure with no family tree. Activation conditions include public memorialization, coverage by at least 2 local outlets, and a law enforcement bulletin coded for homicide. If the signatory resurfaces, penalties apply: liquidation, reassignment, or finalization. He does not need a glossary to translate finalization. There is a padlocked closet in the hallway where the staging crew hid extension cords and neutral art. He opens it with a simple twist of steel and finds a safe no taller than a child. The dial listens to him with clicks that admit how often it has been persuaded. Inside, an envelope holds 8 passports tied with twine, a flash drive taped to a sheet of instructions, and a stack of prepaid cards arranged in decreasing amounts like a staircase down. The drive boots to a directory of contracts, personnel lists, and a document called Stagecraft that reads like a civics lesson for villains. It describes how to layer a convincing death, pre-incident sightings to plant normalcy, a derailed day to add contrast, a scene with enough blood to satisfy cameras and not enough to ruin flooring, a neighbor who remembers a door, a timer on, a thermostat to falsify time of death. He does not learn anything truly new, but he learns that the initiative packages the obvious and sells it like gospel. He does not pocket the passports. He is not tempted to become someone else. He already is. On the drive back to the motel, he watches the city wake. Runners pass church signs that promise tolerance until the small print arrives. Commuters rehearse apologies they may need later. Everyone moves with the certainty that today will continue yesterday. He respects their faith. He just does not share it. The anonymous account messages again. No greeting, just a new set of coordinates. And an hour. A parking garage under a downtown building whose name belongs to a bank that became a logo. The message claims the victim will attend a meeting there, arriving under a new name, leaving with a final one if things go wrong. The message adds a line about the client's presence, expected, not confirmed. He tastes the sentence the way one tastes a coin. The metal feels familiar. He makes himself small on the 7th level of the garage where cameras tilt toward exits instead of truth. He watches the ramps the way hunters watch a tree line. At 10 minutes before the hour, the black SUV climbs in, slow coils, and stops one row over. The woman with sharp movements exits first, scans without dramatics, then opens the rear door. The victim steps out, face clean of grief, posture modest, the way modesty looks expensive. They stand together as if they have practiced the choreography of anyone watching. A consultant guiding a client into a meeting. A project manager delivering a partner to a room where slides will force numbers to pretend they sing. Another car arrives. Not the client's car. That would be too obvious. 2 men in suits step out, followed by a third who wears the kind of casual that costs 3 times more than formality. The third man carries no bag. He has a habit with his left hand of touching the bottom edge of his jacket. Not a nervous tic, but a muscle memory earned in rooms where objects matter. Elias catalogs it all and names the third man the client even before certainty arrives. The certainty arrives anyway when the client turns just enough for Elias to see a profile he recognizes from an article about philanthropic leadership and responsible investment in communities that never see the investment. The client shakes the victim's hand. The woman speaks, head tilted, lips moving with an efficiency that does not waste verbs. No one raises a voice. No one gestures broadly. Their composure is not a performance. It is a requirement. They vanish into the elevator together. Floor indicators track them with indifferent digits. Elias takes the stairs. He prefers an exit that does not depend on electricity. The meeting happens in a conference room with a window, onto a city that makes promises it never intended to keep. Elias watches through a glass wall from a nearby empty office because security is lazy in buildings that believe their tenants are untouchable. Inside, the client speaks. The woman speaks. The victim listens, then answers in sentences that keep his hands flat on the table like he is trying to stop it from floating away. Papers exchange like birds landing. A tablet blinks acceptance, terms, consent to rebirth under a system designed to make citizens into customers of their own disappearance. The client slides a folder across the table. The folder's logo is the initiative's name in gentle letters that pretend compassion. The client indicates a line with 2 fingers. The victim signs, pen steady. The woman slides a second paper. The victim signs again. There is one more document. The victim hesitates. The client waits without blinking. The woman nods once, a small permission that is not for the victim but for time itself to move forward. The victim signs the third paper and becomes a pawn, entering the far row of a board. The client rises first. He shakes hands again with the measured warmth men use when they hire loyalty but only trust leverage. The woman pockets the folder. The victim stands slowly like he is still learning gravity. They exit to a smaller room where a camera in the ceiling blinks red like a lazy heartbeat. Elias keeps distance. He is not here for heroics. He is here for understanding. And understanding sometimes demands that harm must introduce itself before you memorize its face. In the smaller room, the woman hands the victim a phone and a card. She shows him where to tap, how to speak to an automated voice that recognizes only numbers. She points to a clock. The victim nods. She leaves him alone because solitude, at the right moment, is a kind of pressure that forces decisions into shape. Elias reads the signs. The terms are activated. The assets will move. The initiative will take custody of everything the victim once called his life. The clinic becomes a doorway. The warehouse becomes an archive. The model home becomes a theater for auditors who only inspect what is printed on a calendar. Then the initiative will cross out the victim's name in red, because loose ends cost more to maintain than to cut. He proves himself. Right 5 minutes later, when two men who do not belong to this building enter the smaller room and close the door softly. The victim looks at them and understands their purpose before the door latches. Elias does not hear words because words are unnecessary for work like this. The men mean to escort the victim to a vehicle that will not be registered, to a location that will not be written, to a procedure that will not be billed. Finalization. He steps away from the glass and chooses a route that does not require collisions. He leaves the empty office, takes the stairs two at a time, grounds his mind in the geometry of a building built for people who assume the world obeys their schedules. He reaches the level below and enters the corridor that runs under the smaller room. Buildings keep their veins exposed if you look with the right kind of indifference. Access panels, maintenance hatches, ducts that pretend they own no sound. He pries a panel and finds cabling and a junction that feeds the lens above the victim's head. He disconnects it with a grace born of practice. The camera will now have a short memory, enough to show a man alone and then a black rectangle of apology. He returns to the garage and positions his car near the elevator cars that feed the side exit. He waits with the engine cold. He rehearses lines of motion, not lines of dialogue. The elevator opens. The two men hold the victim's arms at the casual angle that reads as assistance to anyone who wants not to notice. The woman follows a step behind, folder secured. The client does not reappear. The client has already moved to whatever room lies between success and celebration. Elias allows the trio to pass. He lets them reach the point between the elevator lobby and the ramp where lights fail to overlap. He moves then, not quick, not slow. A man satisfied with gravity. He brushes the folder out of the woman's arm and lets the papers breathe open across concrete. The reflex that follows is human and undefeated. She reaches for what she is paid to protect. The two men turn half an inch, only half is needed, and he slides the victim from their balance as if removing a block in a tower. They do not speak. Speaking would invite memory that requires explanation. Elias pushes the victim toward the dark lane between SUVs. He puts the folder under his own arm with a permission he does not request. The two men measure the situation not with fear, but with cost-benefit analysis. The woman lifts her gaze to Elias, then to the victim, then to the elevator camera that now stares without seeing. Her calculation ends in a nod that concedes nothing and promises retaliation. The men reset their angle. Elias and the victim vanish, down a ramp that doubles back like a question. In the car, the victim breathes like a man who has collected a debt from himself. Elias drives. He does not ask why. He reads why in the folder. He reads why in the contracts that require a death to launder a fortune. He reads why in the clinic's brochure that sells freedom from old sins, as if sins are jackets you can leave, on a hook at the door. He watches the mirror. The woman's SUV appears for 3 seconds and then chooses a different lane. The men will call someone who will call someone who will post a number on a whiteboard and circle it until a report arrives. Elias has bought time, not safety. He takes the long route west through an industrial zone that hides between a river and a freeway. He pulls under a bridge where graffiti argues with itself. He opens the folder on the hood of the car. The victim stands 5 feet away, a man not sure whether he has been saved, abducted, or repurposed. Elias reads aloud to no one because narration comforts him even when no one hears. The initiative began as an insurance product for companies with executives who were assets. If a CEO disappears to avoid scandal, shareholders suffer. If a founder vanishes to avoid charges, creditors and vendors bleed. The initiative pitched a solution. Pre-plan the departure, stage it convincingly, transfer assets into a trust that would outlive the scandal and preserve value, reassign the person to a new jurisdiction where they would be contained and stabilized. Everyone wins except the truth, which does not have a lobby. Over time, someone pivoted. If you can move a person out of their old life and into captivity in the name of stability, you can move their money more easily than you move them. If you can stage a death to trigger a payout on a policy, why not stage 10? Why not sell the illusion of absolution at scale? Why not acquire lives that cannot escape? He finds a list deep in the folder. Reassignments. It matches the list from the warehouse office, but with additions. Each name includes 2 columns, assets and disposition. Some say retained, some say liquidated, some say finalized. The victim's entry says assets retained, disposition pending. The red line will change pending into ending soon enough. Elias closes the folder and writes a plan. He writes it in verbs because verbs do not lie. Extract, expose, exchange, erase. He needs the client. The client is the switch that can trip a circuit this large. He sends a message from a channel the client used once and forgot. A status update indicating complications, requesting a small meeting at a peripheral location under the pretext of avoiding surveillance. He encrypts it with the casual competence the client expects from a contractor worth his retainer. The reply arrives in minutes with a time and an address that whispers hazard. The address belongs to a private event space above a high-end car dealership that rents aspirations by the hour. Elias arrives early and manufactures a fire drill. He triggers a sensor 2 suites down, introduces a smell polite enough not to panic but insistent enough to clear hallways. Men in suits walk to elevators with the bored expressions of people who believe nothing applies to them. He watches which door stubbornly stays shut. He enters that door. The client stands by a window that frames the dealership's inventory like an altar. He is alone, except for a glass of water and a notebook that cost more than most people's car insurance. He greets Elias with a nod that apologizes for the inconvenience of physical reality. He asks if there is a problem. He asks in the tone people use when they believe all problems are just invoices waiting to be sent. Elias answers by opening the folder. He places the contract on the table and slides a page forward with one finger. He points to the clause about activation, to the list of names, to the ledger that shows asset distribution mechanisms unfriendly to widows and orphans. He explains that the clinic is a keyhole, the warehouse a library, the initiative a knife, that uses philanthropic language as a sheath. He says the victim is alive. He says the initiative plans to correct that oversight before dinner. The client listens with an expression he keeps for weather reports. When Elias finishes, the client asks what he wants. Elias wants a verb. Stop. The client says that is not a verb available under current conditions. He says the initiative purchased inevitability years ago. He says the victim chose adulthood and then chose again when adulthood disagreed with him. He looks at the contract and taps the page where consent is written in mute italics. He says, "Consent is beautiful in court." Elias resumes the math. The client is not an accidental participant. He is architecture. Removing him will not dismantle the building. It will only make certain rooms drafty. He changes the verb in his head from stop to ruin. He will not collapse the initiative today, but he can make it trip over its own legs. He takes the client's notebook and tears 3 pages. He does this with a courtesy that almost looks like respect. The client watches without raising his hands because he knows the cost of appearing surprised. Elias writes a list of account numbers he memorized from the drive, pairs them with timers, and schedules a confession the initiative will not be able to suppress in under 24 hours. He does it with a simple exploit that moves an email from outbox to inbox at exactly the moment a regulator's filter opens for nightly dumps. He writes a letter from the client to a board explaining the initiative's off-balance practices in the language of governance. He appends a spreadsheet that does not need to be true to be devastating. He leaves mercy to accountants. The client asks if he is finished. Elias says almost. He says there is one more sentence that needs to exist in the world, that the staged death did not complete that the signatory remains alive, that penalties are now extended to the client personally under clause breach of ritual. He says the initiative will not forgive that breach. Rituals do not work if participants innovate. He sends this sentence to the initiative through the same throwaway channel that brought him here. He wants to touch the thermostat in the room, where inevitability sits. He wants to see if inevitability can sweat. It sweats within 4 minutes. In the parking deck below, the woman's SUV arrives and parks like a decision. 2 other cars glide in formation. The initiative has decided the meeting should include more participants. Elias moves first because movement buys options. He leaves. Through the stairwell, descends 1 floor, crosses the corridor, and climbs another stair to a room with a second door to the air. He chooses routes like a river. He does not run. Running writes guilt on the floor. He reaches the outside balcony that wraps the building and offers a view of metal and glass and a city that believes in itself too loudly. The woman enters the client's suite with 2 men and a silence that could hire itself out. Elias listens from the balcony because buildings reuse air with the stubbornness of economies. He hears enough to fill in lines without violating his vow to avoid dialogue. The client uses a tone that suggests he expected them. The woman uses a tone that makes consequences sound like policy. The men shift weight between shoes. Someone opens the folder he left. Someone closes it and considers fire. The woman tells the client the reassignment has been compromised. The client says he hired a professional, which should have precluded compromise. The woman says the professional appears to be a variable. The client says variables can be priced. Elias does not wait for the pricing to include him. He moves along the balcony to the stair tower on the corner, descends, crosses a street into a building where retail spaces pretend to be single-purpose churches to temporary brands. He spends 20 minutes dissolving into a mall at lunch hour, because busy places can be kinder to ghosts. He meets the victim in a shop that sells expensive minimalism. The victim arrived because Elias sent a message the victim could not ignore, a photo of the list with his name crossed in red. Elias watches him understand. The victim tries to offer apologies to the room's heir. Elias does not take them. Apologies are just history asking for a bedtime story. He hands the victim the folder and a prepaid phone and 2 addresses. He explains future in terms even panic can follow. If the victim wants to continue living as a man, he must become a problems, an asset. He must send copies of the folder to people who could subpoena God. He must file a claim against the initiative for breach of contract in too many jurisdictions for the calendar to tolerate. He must appear publicly in a way that makes his survival impossible to edit out of the news cycle. The victim nods like a student who finally understands math. He leaves through a door that believes in good lighting. The initiative does not miss him for long. A message arrives on Elias's phone with a location and a clock and a promise disguised as courtesy. The initiative invites him to a conversation at the clinic after hours. He reads the invitation the way he reads contracts, looking for the hole that claims to be a clause. He goes because sometimes walking into a trap is more honest than ignoring it. He enters the clinic through the front because the back doors are always too eager. The lobby lights are set to a level that flatters skin. A wall offers landscapes that never existed. The receptionist desk holds a bell no one will ring. He walks a hallway that lists treatment rooms like destinations on an airport sign. He reaches a door marked reintegration and finds the woman waiting with no folder. She gestures to a chair. He remains standing. She appreciates it. Professionals recognize the sacredness of posture. She tells him the initiative is not a villain, only a technology. She tells him the initiative began as a way to keep markets from shattering when people shatter first. She tells him some clients chose disappearance because prison was not built to teach, only to forget, and forgetting in public is more expensive than forgetting in a private suite. She tells him the initiative was never meant to hurt anyone who did not consent but consent became fog in the heat of demand. She tells him the client is important to continuity, and continuity is the only mercy institutions can afford. He lets her make her case because she is not wrong enough to be dismissed. He counters with numbers. He shows her the ledger lines where assets stop belonging to anyone with a heartbeat. He shows her the finalization code and the list of names with red lines where lives used to continue. He shows her his notebook with verbs. She tests him for a deal. The initiative is prepared to absorb him, she says without saying. They could use a contractor who believes in clean exits and quiet rooms. He could stop running jobs with stage lights flickering overhead and start designing stagecraft that cannot be undone. He could be the reason fewer errors happen, the reason fewer red lines cross. He could sit in an office where he learns to dislike expensive chairs. He refuses, not with drama, not with virtue, just with a calm that treats synergies like smoke. He does not consult for weather. He does not help storms name themselves. The conversation ends with a promise from her that sounds like climate. Things will happen whether anyone approves or not. He answers with a promise of his own. When they do, he will be present. They part with the courtesy of people who may only meet, once more in a room without doors. He has one measure left that can wound something this large. Exposure synchronized with embarrassment. He sends the client's staged confession to a regulatory inbox at the moment a subcommittee convenes a live stream about corporate citizenship. He forwards the initiative's contracts to an investigative reporter who writes with a dull fury about systems that salt the earth and sell it as diet. He encrypts copies into the cloud under accounts that will release on commands disguised as weather alerts. He tells no one about the kill switch because the best insurance policy is the one that looks like weather too. By morning, the first story surfaces in a corner of the internet that powerful people pretend they do not read. By noon, the client's company issues a statement about values. By 2, the initiative's website goes down for maintenance. By 3, a congressional aide calls a reporter who calls a lawyer, who calls a donor, who calls the client. And the day begins to list towards something that feels like accountability if you stand at the right angle. The initiative answers with its own verbs: isolate, blame, replace. It pushes the narrative that a rogue contractor compromised a pilot program. It releases a video of Elias entering the clinic at night, a still frame where posture looks like guilt. It posts a bounty in boardroom words. The woman with sharp movements sends him a final message without adjectives. The victim is now beyond his reach. The red line is ink, not pencil. He checks the 2 addresses he gave the victim. The first is a newsroom with cameras that love stories about second chances until second chances reveal price tags. The second is a courthouse with metal detectors that believe they matter. Both places report that someone arrived, and then someone pulled a fire alarm, and then someone else declared a gas leak, and then the street filled with vehicles that block stories like arteries clot. The victim's face does not appear on any legitimate feed. A private feed shows a man entering a van that does not have plates. The van drives with the confidence of immunity. He drives until Earth becomes flat enough to pretend it has no memory. He finds the warehouse district and parks before the door with the squeaky hinge. He enters prepared to find absence and finds it: shelves thinned, papers burned in bins that tried to disguise their purpose as warmth, computers wiped in ways that brag about consultants. Upstairs, the office calendar still displays the month from 2 years ago, but someone has drawn a red X on today that carves the paper like a wound. He does not stay to compose elegies for what cannot die. He goes to the model home for one last inventory. The safe sits open now, asking questions about solidity. The passports are gone. The prepaid cards remain empty like shells on a beach where tourists never arrive. A note lies in the safe, written in the clean hand of someone who wants the world to assume they were raised well. It contains a single word that many institutions consider sufficient transparency: resolved. He drives to the river and sits on the hood and reads headlines on paper because paper stains. The client's board places him on leave pending review. The initiative's name leaks in documents that will be denied before they are renamed. The clinic issues a statement about abusive contractors it never hired. A legislator announces interest in hearings. A state attorney general posts a video where concern does a convincing impression of competence. Everywhere, language does what it does best in a storm, rearranges itself into life rafts and debris. He receives one more message from the anonymous account. It is a photo, a close-up of a page from a list. The victim's name sits between two others. Beside it, in the disposition column, someone has written a verb not in red, not in blue, but in pencil. The verb is misplaced. It is a word that comforts no one but speaks a specific relief. Not finalized yet, not rescued either, just lost in the machine's gears. He writes in the notebook, "Find, unmake." The initiative begins to close ranks. It tightens money flows like belts. It turns off certain lights after 9. It sends emails that mistake threat for policy. It deletes pages, then deletes statements about deletion. It revises language in public filings so that lives become units and finalization becomes conclusion. He watches it move and recognizes the choreography of an empire that believes it can hide by changing fonts. He visits the client's neighborhood where lawns hire men on Tuesdays. He stands across the street while moving vans with bland logos take turns swallowing furniture built to be noticed. The client appears once at a window and looks not outward but at his own reflection. Elias imagines the calculation being performed. Behind that glass, blame, posture, survival. He does not go to the door. That meeting is already over and nothing honest would grow from its soil. He returns to the motel and considers the ledger of his own life. He turns the folder into scans and ash. He moves names into places where subpoenas will one day find them if the right clerk cares. He erases the prepaid laptop with the care of a man folding a flag. He counts the money in his bag and wonders what currency means when the people who mint meaning treat it like weather too. The city announces storms for the weekend. Mayor's offices like storms. Storms explain things voters dislike. Elias buys another notebook. He writes only one page in it before closing the cover, a map of the initiative's immune system. He marks where lawsuits will find traction and where they will slide off. He marks which donors will decide the optics are now too expensive. He marks which satellites of the initiative will pretend they were always unaffiliated, and which will double down because sunk cost masquerades as faith more convincingly than any religion. Night finds him anyway. He lets it. He drives without destination until the interstate forgets its exits. He stops at a diner with a name painted on the window by someone who never learned to hate their own handwriting. He orders coffee he will not finish and watches the door the way old dogs watch gates. A television in the corner shows a politician's mouth moving without creating sound in his world. He turns back to the notebook. He thinks about verbs. He decides the story is not about killing. It is about accounting. Who does it, who expects it, who avoids it, and who survives it. The initiative is an accountant that learned to audit lives. The client is a line item pretending to be a ledger. The victim is a number written in pencil. Elias is a margin note that refuses to erase. When the check arrives, he leaves cash under the saucer and becomes a figure passing through the camera's frame too slowly for the motion sensor to care. He drives to the edge of the city where a storage unit door waits like a mouth. He opens the unit and inventories again without sentiment. Plates with histories, phones that know how to be silent. A photo pinned to plywood that reminds him the simplest explanation is lazy. He removes the photo and replaces it with a page from the initiative's list where the victim's name wears a verb that is not final. He pins it with a nail he keeps for absolutes. He closes the unit and locks it. He pauses with his hand on the steel and imagines a life where he had accepted the woman's offer, where he becomes the kind of man who writes policies to keep damage inside expected margins. He refuses the fantasy as gently as he refused the job. He walks back to the car and accepts the truth that he will not collapse empires. He will only chip them where their polish shows. He has learned to live with that scale of victory. The phone hums once in his pocket. It is a news alert in the tone of a world that believes everything is content. A new story about the initiative. This one balanced enough to make people feel. Reasonable while they hold anger that will dissolve by morning. The client's name appears in the 4th paragraph, then again in the 7th. A detail from the stagecraft document appears without attribution. Somewhere, a lawyer inhales sharply. Somewhere else, a junior associate feels like a hero for the rest of the week. He drives until the city reassembles around him. He chooses a motel that can barely afford the neon permission to call itself one. He asks for a room facing a stairwell, because he is a man who does not like to invent his own exits when architecture will provide. He showers until the water explains that pressure is finite. He writes in the new notebook a list of the initiative's remaining doors. He writes next. To each door, a small plan that might one day be a plan if circumstance agrees to be polite. He sleeps and dreams nothing he will admit to. In the morning, he buys a newspaper and spreads it on the hood of his car because ink is a truth serum for hands. The obituary page scans past his eyes without landing. He does not expect his name, because he does not permit such sentimentality. Instead, he finds a notice for someone else, a name he recognizes from the list, a timing too convenient to be anything but schedule. He circles it with a pen he stole from the room and writes beside it a word that keeps him working. Postponed. He drives to a park where people pretend running is a form of prayer. He sits on a bench under a tree that seems convinced it can outlive the freeway. He thinks about the victim. He thinks about the pencil line and whether someone woke in a room with no window last night and decided to use an eraser. He imagines the woman's face when a report did not arrive on time. He imagines the client preparing for hearings and denying preparation. He imagines the initiative in a conference room with glass walls and the color of carpet that tells everyone inside the room that outside does not exist. He writes one more word in the notebook. Continued. He tears the page out with both hands. He folds it twice. He puts it in his pocket where it will become a talisman without confessing to being one. He stands and becomes a man, walking across a lawn, a figure the cameras will not bother to learn. He moves toward the day, which promises nothing and therefore cannot be accused of breach. On the drive out, he passes the model home one last time. Workers remove the sign that described joy in a font that hoped to be a friend. A new sign waits to be installed, this one advertising flex offices for hybrid teams. He laughs without sound and without cruelty. The world is efficient at reusing its masks. Before the interstate swallows him, he stops at a mailbox that does not belong to him and inserts 3 envelopes addressed in the same careful hand he uses when he wants the world to read slowly. One to the newsroom that will not let go now that the scent of a series clings to their clothes. One to a public defender's office that specializes in men who cannot pronounce the names printed on their charges. One to a senator with a polite addiction to hearings that produce nothing but light. Inside each envelope lies a piece of the initiative's skeleton. He does not expect a skeleton to fall apart because someone removed 3 ribs. He sends them anyway. People deserve a chance to misinterpret hope as progress. On the highway, he sets the cruise at a speed that invites no conversation. He passes exits with names that pretend they are not interchangeable. He counts the miles to the next job the way monks count beads. He does not believe in redemption, and he does not believe in damnation. He believes in verbs and in the discipline, required to choose the right one when pressure arrives wearing a badge or a smile. At a rest stop, he buys a map because paper makes the world finite. He draws a line from where he is to where the initiative is not prepared to see him. He knows the woman will expect a move east. He chooses a route that wanders southwest through towns where industry forgot to leave forwarding addresses. He will gather 3 more names, 2 more folders, and another version of the same story told in the lonely grammar of policy. He will keep the victim's page pinned in his storage unit because artifacts give a man gravity. He will occasionally check the news for the word misplaced to change into a verb that will force him to become a person who risks more than posture. Night returns. He lets it. He chooses a motel whose carpet apologizes for storms that never happened. He writes a single verb on a blank page before he kills the light. Adjusted. He wrote it once already after a different scene, in a different room, before he learned what kind of theater the initiative sells. It remains the only honest conclusion, available when stories insist on breathing after the credits. He lies back on a bed that believes in springs and stares at the ceiling that believes in paint. Someone in the room beside his laughs the way people laugh when they still trust the world. He does not resent them. He envies no one. He listens to the air unit cycle from busy to bored and thinks about the victim alive somewhere under a sky that belongs to no one. He does not promise himself anything. He only turns the page, ready to write the next verb when morning edits the script again. When his eyes finally close, he does not dream of the initiative. He dreams of a quiet house at the end of a cul-de-sac that bends toward a retention pond, and a flag that will one day fade. He walks through the rooms and notices there are no cameras, no motion sensors, no signs pretending to protect. There is only a sink that remembers water and a clock on a wall that cannot stutter because it has no second hand. He wakes before the alarm because alarms are for people who trust sleep more than they should. He packs the notebook, the pen, the map. He leaves the key on the counter because metal should not travel with him. He steps into a morning already pretending to be afternoon and becomes a car merging into a highway that always becomes every highway. He thinks about the initiative not as a villain, but as a forecast. He thinks about himself not as a hero, but as a countermeasure. He chooses a final verb for the day and writes it on his palm where only the steering wheel will notice. Continue.